Hello and welcome back to another episode of Weights and Wealth. I'm Nick, here with Ted. And Ted and I are starting to get into a little friendly competition, trying to hit a 500-pound deadlift. I know the most I've ever gotten is 495, got it on a couple occasions, but during my last tax season, I didn't keep up with my lifting that much, so it has dropped a fair amount.
And the last time that we each tested our big three, I hit 485 on a deadlift, but I was using straps, so it doesn't really count. Got to get that 500 without straps.
Yeah, so this should, I don't know. I'm hoping to get it by midsummer. I don't know. Do you have any?
I think I'll have you. Yeah, I'll get it before you.
Yeah, you do? Okay, we'll see. I'll just start deadlifting every day. No, don't do that. That would not go well.
Yeah, that's not a good idea. Nick, I think the people want to know, as the commissioner of a football league, how much of a toll does that take on you on a personal and a scheduling level?
Well, there's a lot more issues than I thought there were going to be. I don't know. It seems like people always kind of have an issue with what's really going on. There's always something. I don't know what the most recent thing is. Trying to find somebody to take over somebody else's team. Yeah. So
Nick's the commissioner of our fantasy football league, and he does a good job. Last year for the draft, he had a PowerPoint presentation of different stats from everyone from the previous season. So
yeah, I put a lot of time into that, more than I cared. I don't know. It's probably I probably spent like 3 or 4 hours trying to come up with that. But I'll have a better one this year.
All right.
So
looking forward to it. What's our topic for today, Nick?
So we got everything about compounding. We have compound lifting and compounding interest. So do you want to start with the weights or wealth portion today?
Why don't we start off with the wealth portion?
Okay, so compounding interest. It has been described as the eighth wonder of the world by Warren Buffett, I believe. And basically what it is earning interest on your interest. So say you invest $1 today and you earn 10% per year. You'll have $1.10 at the end of the year. And then the following year you earn another 10%. And so you'll earn 11 cents in interest that year, and it becomes $1.21. Now, that might not sound like it's that much right now, but it does add up over the course of 30, 40, 50 years.
Because it becomes an exponential curve after a certain number of years.
Right. And after 50, 60 years, it's incredible what a very small investment can come out to. I do have one thing here. If you invest $10,000 at 7% over the course of 20 years, that'll become $47,000. So that's just starting with 10,000, not putting another dollar into it, which is about what the stock market returns.
And this is how you can, or anyone can, become a millionaire just by investing $300, $400, $500 a month into an index fund long term, as long as the market continues on its upward trajectory and you have this compounding interest. It's very easy to build a portfolio of hundreds of thousands of dollars that can be your retirement.
Right. And this is also how people build generational wealth. You know, you just have to put a little bit of money into a fund for your kids when they're young, and it'll grow to a very large amount by the time that they're 60 or 70. Mm-hmm. Same thing with investing for college. If you put money away as soon as your kid's born, 18 years later, that will be worth a lot more. Mm-hmm. So there are a few different factors that can really influence your compounding, and that's frequency, time, and amount. So frequency is how often you deposit money. So instead of depositing $1,200 at the end of the year, do $100 a month. And that can make a substantial difference over the course of 40 or 50 years, just because that $100 starts compounding January 1st instead of December 31st. And then the amount of time. So if you start investing when you're 20 and your money has time to grow over 40, 50, 60 years, it'll grow to a much larger amount than if you start at even 25 or 30. 5 years can make a huge difference. And then the amount, obviously, the more that you put in, the quicker it'll grow.
Yeah. So time, frequency, and amount. Those are the three factors for compounding.
Yep. Yeah. And the one that is the easiest to really manipulate is the amount of time, because you only have so much money. So that's the amount. And the frequency, you only make money so much at a given time. I would love to be able to just invest $10,000 at the start of the year, but I make that over the course of the year.
Sure.
So
I wish I had started investing with this mindset when I was 18, because if I had started putting just $50 or $100 a month away into an index fund like this at that age, over the course of 20 years, you can pretty much retire after that, right? So then I could have, you could retire at 40 maybe if you are able to start investing right away at 18 years old.
Yeah, and this is something that I'm surprised. I mean, I kind of think it's common knowledge now. I don't really know, but I did not know about this when I was 18, like you were saying.
Yeah.
Even though
they teach us those equations in high school math classes, but there's not a class in high school that teaches you, hey, guys, with your part-time job, put away $100 a month. This is how it will grow. Here's a bar graph that shows you. They don't really teach us that, I don't think, and it doesn't really register. We don't really take that formula of exponential growth from math class and overlay it with what we could be doing.
Yeah, and that kind of brings up they could easily teach stuff like this in public school. I put all of my earnings when I was 16, 17, 18 just right into a bank account, and it just sat there until college. And I didn't do anything with it. It wasn't growing at all, just because I was scared of putting it in the market and having it go down. When at the time, I didn't realize that in the long run, I would probably be okay.
Yep. Absolutely. I think part of that might be also from when we were entering middle school, high school was right after the Great Recession. So fresh in our mind was the huge drop in the stock market, which probably made us a little bit more worried to get involved in any of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I do remember a couple of the guys that I worked with, though, did start investing. And I remember one guy in particular really liked Tesla at the time. So I don't know if he actually bought too much of it, but if he did, he'd be doing pretty well right now.
It's the next Apple, I guess. We always talk about that, but that's the advantage of just picking a couple companies you believe in and putting a small portion of your investments into that company.
Yeah, and I mean, at the time, I didn't know about index funds either, and that they're relatively lower risk.
Did you ever have I think in 6th grade, we had one of our classes, we were able to pick stocks. I think it might have been my math class in 6th grade. There was an activity where we each started with some amount of money, like fake money, and put in an account and keep trading and see who made the most money at the end. But the kids that won were kids that got in on some penny stocks that went up. It wasn't actually, it showed gambling more than real investing in index funds.
Yeah. No, we had a stock club that I think it was one day a week. There was, at the end of the school day, there was, a bunch of clubs to join. I joined the investing club. I thought it was neat. But I also remember I'm just pretty conservative with my money by nature. I was a little hesitant to invest all of it, but I do remember that. Yeah, it was a lot of fun and just picking. I did pick penny stocks. I don't really remember too much, but
do you have any other number tricks or things for people to get a better visual of how their money will increase over time with compounding interest? I know we have that 10-7 kind of rule, or the 72 rule.
Yeah, so I just go by the rule of 72. So you take 72, divide it by your interest rate, and that's approximately the amount of time it'll take your money to double.
Okay.
So say you invest at a 7% interest rate, 72 over 7 is about 10. So it'll take about 10 years
To double your money?
to double.
Okay.
Yeah. So if we go at that, or go with that, say you start with $10,000, takes 10 years to double is 20,000, and then it doubles again after 20 years to 40,000, 30 years to 80,
And that's
40
where we
years
get
to
that
160.
exponential curve on it.
Right. Yeah.
So again, a common theme we presented here is long-term investing. And then also, do you have anything for people with dividends? Because even when I knew about compounding interest, I didn't know about dividends with stocks. I guess I just didn't really know much about the stock market.
Yeah, I don't know the exact numbers on how reinvesting dividends will affect your gains, but I do know that it's substantial. Most of the returns, when people say the stock market returns, 8% a year, that's including with reinvesting dividends.
Okay.
It's a good portion lower when dividends aren't reinvested and just taken in cash. Even though dividends are generally pretty small, they're 3-4% or so. I think the highest is like 7-8. Dividends really don't get too high. It just makes more sense to reinvest in.
Okay. And what are dividends for the people that don't know?
Oh, yeah. So when you own a stock and the company makes money, they distribute that money to their shareholders in the form of a dividend. And that's generally when a company is more mature. When companies are in growth mode, they don't really distribute their money as much. They would rather put that money back into the company. But by the time a company is very established, they start paying the people that own the company money.
Okay.
So in addition to dividends, the other way to make money on a stock is through capital gains, with just the stock going up in price.
Mm-hmm. And the cool thing with dividends is you reinvest them in the beginning, but then eventually, if you get to a place where you have several $100,000 in your stocks, you can just live off of the dividends if you want to. Because if you have several $100,000 in stocks, you can be making a few $1,000s a month just on the dividends, and that can be essentially your salary. So that's another way to have cash flow outside of having like real estate or a business, or a piece of a business is you can have stock, which I guess is a small piece of a business. But if you have those dividends, that's another way to have a cash flow through an asset.
Right. And that's the ultimate form of passive income, is really dividends, because you don't have to do anything for it. And like Ted was saying, if you build your portfolio up to $1 million and you get an 8% dividend on that, that's $80,000 a year.
Yeah. Do you have anything else on the wealth side today?
That's about it from the wealth side. Now we're getting into your compound lifts.
Yep. A good book, if you're interested in learning more about how things compound, is The Compound Effect by Darren Hardy. It's a pretty quick read. This is one of the books that I give away to people the most, I think. Alex, you read The Compound Effect, right?
I did.
What did you think about it?
I thought it was fantastic.
Yeah,
She thought it was fantastic. On to compound lifts. Compound lifts are kind of like compounding interest in the way that you have to contribute to them over time and build the skill, put in the practice over time, building the skill of these lifts, and you wind up with really big returns that increase over time. When you first start learning how to squat or deadlift or bench press, a lot of the gains that you'll get from that is going to be just through the neural connections that you build and learning how to do it and getting better at the technique. But after you start to get the technique down, a lot of the gains that you'll get on those lifts are actually strength and muscle gains. So if you stick with some of these skills and work on improving your squat, your deadlift, your bench press, your overhead press, your rows, those will compound into a lot of strength and mass gains over time, which is really where you want to be in the long run for lifting. We're just going to continue, but our camera went out. Nick, what were you saying?
So Ted, for those who don't know, what defines a compound lift from another type of lift?
Yeah, so a compound lift is going to involve multiple joints that are moving, right? So in a squat, for example, you're moving at the ankle, the knee, and the hip. Whereas an isolation exercise like a bicep curl, you're only moving at the elbow. So compound lifts are going to involve multiple joints. And usually when we talk about compound lifts, we're talking about free weights. So barbells or dumbbells. Although there are some lifts or like machine exercises that you could consider like a compound externally stabilized lift, like a leg press, where you're still moving at the hip and the knee, but it's externally stabilized because you're on the pad and you're just pushing with your legs, but there's a support for your body, so you're more stable. So with some of these like machine exercises, there's an external support for you, so your body's more stable, so that you're able to drive an output with the muscle more. Whereas with the free weight compound lifts, you have to internally stabilize within your body. So you might not drive as much output, but you'll get a lot more co-contraction between different muscles. Does that make sense?
Yeah, right. So when it's stabilized, it can only move on a two-dimensional plane, right? And then if it's not, it can move on a three-dimensional.
Not necessarily, because you could have something like a seated cable fly where you're sitting. If you bring a bench over to the cable fly and you're sitting down, that's technically externally stabilized, and then you're still doing a fly. So
Okay.
The big thing to look at with your compound movements, if you're trying to fit more into one workout, you want to be moving several joints at the same time, most likely. This is where we start to get into programming, and like we mentioned in the previous episode, for beginners, you're probably going to want to focus on driving output through what you could call like an output focused exercise, like some sort of leg press or hammer strength machine row, where you're just like pulling or pushing on the machine. But then over time, you want to practice and learn the skill of a lift, like a free weight squat or deadlift, where there's a lot more skill involved. But over time, if you can learn that skill, it's going to be massively beneficial to your long-term gains. I personally prefer the free weight exercises.
Yeah, so do I. I just feel like I get such a better workout from them. One question I do have, though, because when I think of bodybuilders, I just think of them on machines more.
Yep.
Is one better for growing muscle?
So if you're looking for hypertrophy, the thing about a machine is you can focus a lot more on the action of the muscle. So if you're using, let's put it this way, with a row, if you're doing like a T-bar row, like we talked about in the last episode, where you're protracting your shoulder blades and going forward with your shoulders, and then you're coming back, you're using all your muscles in your back, right? So they're all working together and co-contracting. Whereas if you're set up on a machine and you're just rowing with your lat, you can target just your lat. So if you're focused more on hypertrophy and you're doing more of a split where you're doing different muscles on different days and bringing up the intensity with each muscle group, you're probably going to be better off with hypertrophy if you can just engage that muscle more and put more volume into that muscle. The problem with the average person for that strategy is that most people aren't earning the recovery for lifting every day, right? So most people don't have great nutrition and great sleep where they're going to recover from lifting every day. So that's where, like, even though it might be optimal to put more volume through that muscle group to build more muscle, if if your recovery is only here at like a C level on like an A through F grade scale, but the volume that you're pushing through the muscle is at like a B, well, you're capped by that C recovery.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. So
That's like one way to think about it. I think that makes it easy to kind of see how your recovery potential is going to cap the volume or intensity that you're lifting with. That's where you get into overtraining. If you're training too much and you're not recovering enough, then you're not going to make gains, because you make your gains when you're recovering and when your body's repairing itself and super compensates through the stimulus that you sent it.
So does targeting the muscle specifically through like by isolating them, does that make them tear more, put more stress on them?
So common misconception with what builds muscle is like the breaking down or tearing of muscle fibers. The main driver of hypertrophy is tension on the muscle. So one of the reasons why like an isolation lift or an output focused exercise on a machine might be better than a compound lift for hypertrophy of a certain muscle is if you're focusing on one muscle, you might be able to put more tension on it using like a machine than doing a compound movement, right? So you might be able to put more tension through your bicep if you're doing a preacher curl on a machine that's stabilized under your arm, as opposed to when you're doing a row and your biceps are involved, but you're not putting as much tension through your bicep. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does.
So if you're thinking just hypertrophy, then you're going to want to think, how can I place the most tension on this muscle? And you're going to want to train it in the shortened range and the mid range and the lengthened range. And we can target these different ranges most effectively, usually through using cables or machines, as opposed to a compound lift, which is really only going to usually target the mid range of these muscle groups. If you think about a press, that's mostly going to target like the mid range of the pec. But then if we do a pec fly, we can target the fully lengthened range of that pec, right? Mm-hmm. So in that sense, if you're looking just for hypertrophy, it might make more sense to use machines and cables and have external focus, or external stabilization. But in the long run, we also want to increase our strength and our internal stability to avoid injury. And also because with strength and hypertrophy, they kind of track together, but they're also different, right? So if you focus on getting strong, you'll also usually get bigger. If you focus on getting bigger and increasing hypertrophy, you'll also get stronger, but they're different. It's not like a direct one-to-one correlation, right?
Yeah. When do you kind of see those diverge? Because I mean, I would think at least at the amateur level that your training wouldn't really be different, that they would both happen at the same time. But we do see powerlifters and bodybuilders train very differently.
So as you keep training and as you get more extreme, they diverge more and more. But if I'm with a beginner, if I get them to increase their strength on exercises, they're also probably going to increase hypertrophy as long as they're feeding muscle growth with enough calories and enough protein and giving the body what it needs to grow muscle. Yeah. Any other questions around that?
Well, this is completely random. Well, not completely random, but you did just mention protein. Is there too much protein? Is it possible to consume too much protein?
Not really.
Okay.
The cutoff point for how much protein you're consuming is going to be determined by one of two factors. The first one is that it simply gets too expensive for you to keep eating more protein because protein's expensive. And the second one would be that when you eat too much protein, you may run into digestive issues. So if you start having digestive issues, just pull back your protein a little bit. But usually usually people can't like eat enough protein from their appetite to get to that point where they're eating too much protein and start having digestive issues.
Okay, so there aren't any other drawbacks to that? No. Okay, because I heard something the other day that it could affect your hormones. It could lower testosterone somehow.
I've never heard that.
I didn't fact check that myself, but I was just curious if you might know.
I've never heard that or seen any studies around that. Well, if you enjoyed this episode of Weights and Wealth, be sure to subscribe and give reviews on whatever platform you're listening, and check us out on social media and share our podcast with your friends and family that you think would enjoy.
All right. Thank you for joining us today.